In court, my wife's new lover, a lawyer, laughed. The judge is my best friend. You're leaving this room with nothing, soldier. My wife smirked. He's too scared to even speak. Look at him. He slid a paper in front of me. Sign it. Now. He had no idea who I really was. My name's Marshall Keene, and I've always been the type of guy who keeps his mouth shut and his eyes open. 15 years in special forces will do that to you. Teach you that sometimes the quietest man in the room is the most dangerous one. After all those years of gunfire, midnight raids, and watching good men die for causes that seemed to change with every briefing, I thought I was done with battles. I left all that behind, hoping to find something I'd never really had before, peace. Something steady, something normal. That's when I met Talia Rodriguez at a coffee shop downtown. She was this vibrant paralegal with these killer brown eyes and a laugh that could light up a whole damn room. She had this energy about her, like she could take on the world and win. She was everything I wasn't. Loud where I was quiet, spontaneous where I was calculated, warm where I'd grown cold from too many years of military structure and battlefield discipline. For the first time in my adult life, someone made me believe I could actually build something normal, something good. She'd drag me to parties where I'd stand in corners nursing a beer, watching her work the room like she owned it. She'd introduce me as her mysterious boyfriend, and I'd just nod and shake hands with people whose biggest problems were office politics and mortgage payments. It felt foreign as hell, but I liked it. For 3 years, I thought maybe I'd finally found my place in the civilian world. Maybe I could be the guy who grilled burgers on weekends and worried about lawn care instead of enemy combatants. But right now, sitting in this stuffy courtroom that smells like old wood and broken dreams, I'm watching the woman I thought I'd spend my life with hold hands with another man. Grayson York, this flashy defense lawyer with teeth so white they probably glow in the dark and an ego bigger than Texas. The bastard's got perfectly styled hair, a suit that costs more than most people make in a month, and the kind of cocky swagger that tells everyone in the room he thinks he's already won whatever game he's playing. And maybe he has won, at least in his mind. He keeps glancing over at me with this smug little smile, like he's watching a wounded animal that's too stupid to know it's already dead. Talia's right there beside him, her hand in his, and she's got this look on her face. Not guilt, not shame, but something worse. Satisfaction. Like she's finally trading up from some damaged goods she never really wanted in the first place. The whole scene feels surreal, like I'm watching someone else's life fall apart in slow motion. 3 months ago, I was making her coffee every morning and listening to her complain about her boss. Now she's sitting 20 feet away from me, and I might as well be a stranger. Hell, I might as well be invisible. That's when Grayson decides to twist the knife a little deeper. He leans over, close enough that I can smell his expensive cologne, and whispers with that cruel smile plastered across his face. The judge is my best friend, soldier boy. You're walking out of here with absolutely nothing. Hope you enjoyed playing house while it lasted. And Talia? She doesn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. Instead, she smirks, actually smirks, and adds in that voice I used to love, "Look at him, Gray. He's too scared to even speak up for himself. I told you he'd just sit there and take it. They think they know me. They think they've got me figured out. Some broken-down veteran who's too shell-shocked or too weak to fight back. Just another casualty of war who came home different, smaller, quieter than when he left. They see a man who's been sitting in silence for the past hour, not saying a word while they carve up his life like it's some kind of Thanksgiving turkey. But here's what they don't understand, what they can't possibly know. I'm not scared. Fear and I parted ways a long time ago, somewhere between Kandahar and a dozen other places that don't exist on any tourist maps. What I am is something much more dangerous than scared. I'm calculating. I'm processing. I'm doing what I've always done best, gathering intelligence, assessing threats, and planning my next move. See, they think silence means weakness. In their world of constant noise and posturing, they've forgotten that the most dangerous predators are the ones you never hear coming. They've mistaken my quiet for defeat, my stillness for surrender. They have no idea that behind these calm eyes, I'm already 3 steps ahead of whatever game they think they're playing. I'm remembering who I used to be before I tried to become the man Talia said she wanted. Before I convinced myself that normal was something I could learn like a new language. I'm remembering that sometimes the only way to find peace is to remind people why they should leave you the hell alone in the first place. So I sit here, perfectly still, perfectly quiet, while they think they're winning. And I let them think it. Because in about 5 minutes, when that judge calls this session to order, they're going to learn something important about Marshall Keene. I didn't survive 15 years of the world's nastiest neighborhoods by rolling over and playing dead. And I sure as hell didn't come home from 3 tours just to let some pretty boy lawyer and my cheating ex-wife think they can take everything I've worked for without a fight. They wanted to wake up the soldier? Fine. But they better be ready for what comes next. Grayson's manicured fingers slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany table like he was dealing cards in some high-stakes poker game. The papers made this soft rustling sound that seemed way too loud in the quiet tension of that conference room. I could smell the fresh ink on those pages, could practically feel the expensive letterhead paper between my fingers before I even touched the damn thing. This wasn't just any paperwork. This was the kind of document that changes everything, the kind that splits a life right down the middle and leaves you wondering what the hell just happened. Divorce terms, he announced with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for announcing lottery numbers. His voice had this smooth, practiced quality that probably worked great on juries, but right now it just made my skin crawl. Everything's laid out nice and clean for you, Marshall. No confusion, no gray areas. Just sign on the dotted line, and we can all move on with our lives. I pulled the papers toward me, and the first thing that hit me was how thorough these bastards had been. They hadn't just divided up our stuff. They dissected our entire life together like some kind of forensic accountant's wet dream. The house on Maple Street where I'd spent weekends fixing the front porch and painting the shutters? Gone. Every penny of the savings account I'd been building since my first deployment, putting away money while other guys were blowing their paychecks on booze and women overseas? Cleaned out. Even my military pension, the one thing I'd earned with blood, sweat, and 15 years of my life. They wanted a piece of that too. But what really got to me, what made my jaw clench so hard I thought I might crack a tooth, was seeing Harper's name on that paper. My dog. The German Shepherd mix I'd rescued from a shelter 3 years ago, who'd been with me through sleepless nights and PTSD episodes, who'd never once judged me for waking up screaming or spending entire weekends in complete silence. They wanted to take Harper away from me like he was just another piece of furniture to be divided up. Sign it. Now, Grayson demanded, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against the table in this irritating rhythm that was probably supposed to make me nervous. His perfectly white teeth were showing in what he probably thought was a smile, but looked more like a predator baring its fangs. We don't have all day, and frankly, you're not in a position to negotiate. This is as good as it's going to get for you, soldier. I stared at those papers, and my fingers just wouldn't move toward that pen. Not because I was scared. Hell no. Not because I was overwhelmed or confused or any of the things they probably expected from some broken-down veteran who couldn't handle civilian life. My hands stayed perfectly still because something was happening in my head, something I hadn't felt in 3 years of trying to be normal, trying to be the kind of man who worries about mortgage payments and grocery lists instead of enemy positions and extraction points. I was remembering who I used to be before I met Talia. Before I convinced myself that I could just hang up my boots and pretend like 15 years of Special Forces training would just fade away like some kind of bad dream. Before I started believing that Marshall Keene the civilian was somehow different from Marshall Keene the operator. See, back in the day, I wasn't just some grunt with a rifle. I was part of an elite unit called Sable Echo, a name that probably doesn't mean anything to most people, and that's exactly how we liked it. We were the guys who operated in the shadows, who collected intelligence that never made it into official reports, who dismantled entire criminal networks and terrorist cells without anyone ever knowing we'd been there. We were ghosts, moving through places where regular soldiers couldn't go, doing things that regular soldiers couldn't do. I remembered briefings in unmarked buildings where we'd study photographs of targets for hours, memorizing faces and routines and weaknesses. I remembered the satisfaction of watching a carefully planned operation unfold exactly as designed, seeing months of preparation pay off in a single night of perfect execution. I remembered what it felt like to be part of something bigger than myself, something that mattered, something that required every skill I'd ever learned and a few I'd had to invent on the fly. And now, Sitting in this conference room with its expensive artwork and its view of downtown traffic, I realized that my enemy wasn't some foreign operative or international arms dealer. My enemy was sitting right across from me, dressed in a silk tie that probably cost more than some people's rent, thinking he was so damn smart because he'd managed to steal another man's wife and convince her to help him steal everything else too. The thing is, Grayson Yerk thought he knew who he was dealing with. He saw a quiet veteran, maybe a little damaged, definitely out of his element in the world of legal maneuvering and courtroom politics. He figured I was just another casualty of the system, someone who'd served his country and come home to find out that civilian life was harder than combat. He thought Marshall Keene was just some tired old soldier who didn't have the energy or the knowledge to fight back against a skilled attorney with connections and resources. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly know, was that he'd just awakened something that had been sleeping for 3 years. Something that knew how to hunt, how to plan, how to find weaknesses and exploit them with surgical precision. He thought he was dealing with a victim, but what he'd actually done was wake up the ghost. I looked up from those papers and met his eyes for the first time since he'd slid them across the table. And I smiled. I didn't sign that paper. Hell no. Instead, I did something that probably confused the shit out of both Grayson and Talia. I asked for time to review it. Just like that, calm as you please, like I was considering buying a used car instead of having my entire life stripped away from me. The look on Grayson's face was priceless. This mix of confusion and irritation, like he'd been expecting me to either roll over and play dead, or maybe have some kind of emotional breakdown right there in his fancy conference room. I need 72 hours to go over this with my own legal counsel. I told him, my voice steady as bedrock. I'm sure you understand. This is a pretty big decision, and I want to make sure I'm not missing anything important. Talia actually laughed at that, this bitter little sound that used to be cute when she was making fun of bad movies, but now just sounded ugly. Legal counsel? Marshall, you can barely afford your rent. What lawyer's going to take your case? That's when I knew for sure that she'd never really understood who I was, even after 3 years together. She thought my quiet nature meant I was helpless, that my preference for staying out of drama meant I didn't have connections. She had no idea that guys like me, guys who'd spent their careers in the shadows, we don't advertise our networks. We don't name drop or brag about who we know. We just make the call when we need to. Walking out of that law office felt like stepping out of a fog I didn't even realize I'd been living in. The afternoon sun hit my face, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually breathe. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in almost 2 years. Dre Knox, the best tech specialist I'd ever worked with, and probably one of the smartest guys I'd ever met, period. Dre had been our digital wizard back in Sable Echo, the kind of guy who could hack into enemy communications while we were still planning the mission, who could make security cameras forget they'd ever seen us, who could track financial transactions through 7 different countries and 3 different currencies. After we all went our separate ways, he'd landed on his feet as a cybersecurity contractor, making serious money helping corporations protect themselves from the kind of threats we used to be. Marshall fucking Keene. His voice came through the phone with genuine warmth. Please tell me you're not calling because you're bored and want to go kick down some doors for old time's sake. Worse than that, brother, I said, walking toward my truck. I need a favor. The kind that might remind you why you left the service in the first place. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had shifted into that professional tone I remembered from mission briefings. How dirty are we talking here? I gave him the short version, Talia, Grayson, the divorce papers, the whole mess. By the time I finished, I could practically hear him cracking his knuckles through the phone. So let me get this straight, Dre said. Some pretty boy lawyer thinks he can steamroll one of my brothers, and your ex thinks you're just going to roll over and take it? Oh, this is going to be fun. Give me everything you've got on this Grayson Yerk asshole, full name, law firm, whatever you know. I'll have his entire digital life spread out like a roadmap within the hour. While Dre was doing his computer magic, I made another call I'd been putting off for way too long. Lorna Vale had been our JAG officer back in the day, the military lawyer who'd kept us out of serious trouble more times than I could count. She'd had this reputation for being tougher than most of the infantry guys, and she could argue her way out of anything. After her service, she'd transitioned to civilian practice and built herself quite a reputation as a defense attorney who didn't lose cases. Marshall Keene, "You son of a bitch," she answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd finally call. Heard through the grapevine that you were trying to play house with some paralegal." "Yeah, well, that experiment just blew up in my face," I said. "And now I need someone who knows how to fight dirty in a courtroom instead of a battlefield." I met Lorna at a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place that served coffee in mugs instead of paper cups and had actual books on the shelves instead of just decoration. She looked exactly like I remembered: sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the kind of confidence that came from never backing down from a fight. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes in a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my truck payment. When I finished, she closed the portfolio and looked me straight in the eye. "Marshall, I've represented senators, CEOs, and at least 3 people who probably should have been in federal prison. But this one's personal. Nobody gets to screw over one of my boys and walk away clean." She leaned back in her chair and smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made opposing counsel seriously consider career changes. "Here's what's going to happen. You're not walking into that courtroom alone again. If they want to play games, we'll show them what real strategy looks like. If they want war, we'll bring a fucking army." By the time I got home that evening, Dre had already sent me a preliminary report on Grayson York that was 30 pages long. Bank records, client lists, property holdings, social media activity, everything short of his dental records. And buried in all that data were some very interesting connections that I was pretty sure Grayson thought nobody would ever find. For the first time since this whole mess started, I was smiling. Really smiling. Because Grayson York had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed his enemy was just some broken-down veteran who didn't know how to fight back. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Turns out Grayson wasn't bullshitting about having the judge in his back pocket. Judge Clayton Bell really was his friend, but friend was putting it pretty damn lightly. What Dre uncovered in his digital deep dive was way more interesting than some old college buddy doing favors. This was a full-blown financial entanglement that would make a mobster blush. I was sitting in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, nursing my 3rd cup of coffee and going through Dre's report page by page, when the real picture started coming together. Judge Bell wasn't just friendly with Grayson, he was drowning in debt to him. The good judge had a serious gambling problem that he'd been trying to keep under wraps for years, and Grayson's law firm had been floating him loans through a series of shell companies that were buried so deep it took someone with Dre's skills to find them. But it got better. Bell owned 3 properties around the city, a downtown condo, a lake house, and some commercial real estate that was supposed to be his retirement nest egg. Except every single one of those properties was tied up in financing deals with holding companies that traced back to Grayson's firm. The bastard basically owned the judge, and Bell was so far underwater he couldn't even see the surface anymore. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, flipping through bank statements that showed regular payments from something called Meridian Holdings LLC directly into Bell's personal account. This guy's not just corrupt, he's completely owned. My phone buzzed with a text from Dre. "Found more. Check page 47. This gets ugly." Page 47 was a real eye-opener. Turned out Bell's gambling problem wasn't just poker games with the boys or weekend trips to Atlantic City. This fool had been betting on everything: sports, horses, hell, probably the weather. And when he couldn't cover his losses, Grayson had stepped in as his personal loan shark, complete with interest rates that would make a payday lender jealous. I called Lorna and walked her through everything we'd found. She listened in that focused way that told me she was already 3 steps ahead, probably planning our next moves while I was still trying to wrap my head around how deep this corruption went. "This is beautiful," she said when I finished. "We don't even need to prove corruption directly. All we need to do is file for a judicial ethics review and let the State Bar Association connect the dots. The beauty of it is, we don't have to make any accusations. We just present the financial connections and let the ethics committee draw their own conclusions." "How do we do that without tipping our hand?" I asked. "Anonymous filing," she replied without missing a beat. "Someone, and it won't be us, is going to submit these documents to the Judicial Conduct Board. No noise, no drama. Just a concerned citizen bringing potential conflicts of interest to the attention of the proper authorities." That afternoon, while some mysterious Good Samaritan was dropping off a thick envelope at the State Judicial Ethics Office, I decided to start applying some pressure to other parts of Grayson's world. See, One thing you learn in special forces is that you never attack your target head-on when you can hit them from 6 different angles they never saw coming. Dre's research had turned up some interesting information about Grayson's client base and business relationships. The guy had his fingers in a lot of pies, and not all of them smelled particularly fresh. There was this personal injury case from 2 years ago where he'd gotten a massive settlement for a client who'd been injured in a construction accident. Nothing wrong with that, except the client had mysteriously disappeared right after the settlement, and the construction company that paid out had some very interesting connections to organized labor disputes. Then there was his partnership with a firm that specialized in real estate law, handling deals for developers who seemed to have an unusual knack for acquiring land right before major city development projects were announced. Either these guys were psychic, or someone was feeding them inside information about municipal planning decisions. I started making calls, not to threaten anyone or cause trouble, just to ask some innocent questions. I called the State Bar Association to inquire about filing a complaint against an attorney for potential malpractice. I contacted the Better Business Bureau to ask about the process for reporting questionable business practices. I even reached out to a few investigative journalists who specialized in local corruption stories, just to let them know there might be an interesting story developing. Each call was perfectly legal, perfectly legitimate, and completely untraceable back to me. But taken together, they started creating ripples in Grayson's carefully constructed world. Within a week, I was hearing through Dre's network that some of Grayson's clients were getting nervous, asking uncomfortable questions about their cases, and demanding more documentation than usual. The real beauty of it was watching the domino effect in real time. A former client of Grayson's filed a malpractice suit, claiming he'd been pressured into accepting a settlement that was way below what his case was worth. One of his business partners, some real estate developer who'd been working with Grayson's firm for years, suddenly disappeared from their website and stopped returning phone calls. A city councilman who'd been photographed at several charity events with Grayson announced he was taking a temporary leave of absence to deal with personal matters. None of this was random. None of it was coincidence. This was what happened when someone with my particular skill set decided to systematically dismantle an enemy's support network. Every pressure point Dre had identified in his research, every weakness we'd found in Grayson's operation, every person who had something to lose if their connection to him became public, they were all getting just enough attention to make them very, very nervous. And the beautiful thing was, Grayson had no idea it was coming from me. As far as he knew, I was just some defeated veteran sitting at home licking my wounds, waiting for the next court date so he could finish destroying what was left of my life. He was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who stays completely invisible until it's too late to fight back. Of all the things Talia took when she walked out of my life, Harper was the one that really got under my skin. That dog had been with me through some of the darkest times after I left the service. Nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I was back in some godforsaken desert halfway around the world, and Harper would just be there, solid and warm and real, reminding me that I was safe at home. He didn't ask questions, didn't judge me for the nightmares, or the times I'd go 3 days without saying a word to another human being. He just stayed close and waited for me to come back to myself. So when Talia claimed she needed him for emotional support, I wanted to laugh. The woman who'd spent 3 years complaining that Harper shed too much, that he tracked mud through the house, that he took up too much space on the couch. Suddenly she couldn't live without him? Right. The only thing Harper was supporting was her manipulation game, giving her another way to twist the knife and make sure I knew exactly how much she could take away from me. But Harper's not stupid. Dogs know things about people that we humans are too busy or too proud to see. Within a week of living in that fancy downtown penthouse with Talia and Grayson, my boy was making his feelings pretty damn clear. According to my sources, and yeah, I had sources now, because that's what happens when you decide to stop playing victim, Harper wasn't adjusting well to his new living situation. The source was Naomi Blanchard, a veterinary technician who'd been Talia's friend since college and had never really warmed up to Grayson. Naomi was one of those people who spoke her mind regardless of whether you wanted to hear it. And apparently she'd been watching this whole mess unfold with growing disgust. She called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with anger. "Marshall, you need to come get your dog," she said without any preamble. "This is fucked up, and I can't stand by and watch it anymore." "What's going on?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. Harper's not eating. He's barely drinking water. He just sits by the door and whines, like he's waiting for someone to come get him. And Grayson, she paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. Grayson yells at him. Constantly. Yesterday, I saw him grab Harper's collar and shake him because the dog barked when someone came to the door. Harper's scared, Marshall. Really scared. Something cold and sharp settled in my chest when she said that. I'd seen Harper face down aggressive dogs twice his size without backing down. Had watched him sleep peacefully through thunderstorms that sent other dogs hiding under beds. If Harper was scared, it meant Grayson was doing more than just yelling. There's something else, Naomi continued. Talia's been talking about taking him to a shelter. Says he's too much work, that he's not adapting to city life. She's planning to dump him this weekend. That was it. Game over. I didn't care about legal battles or custody agreements or any of the other bullshit that was tying up my life in court. Nobody was taking my dog to a shelter. Nobody was abandoning the one living thing that had stuck by me when everything else fell apart. Where are they keeping him? I asked. Grayson's penthouse has a private garage in the basement. Harper's been sleeping down there because Grayson doesn't want dog hair on his precious furniture. Marshall, it's not right. The dog's miserable. Give me the address, I said. That night, I did what I'd been trained to do for 15 years. I planned a quiet extraction. The penthouse building was one of those new glass towers downtown, all sleek lines and expensive security that was designed to impress people more than actually keep anyone out. I spent 2 hours sitting in my truck across the street, watching the patterns. Security guard made his rounds every 90 minutes. Parking garage had cameras, but they were focused on the vehicle entrances, not the pedestrian access points. Emergency exit on the east side was alarmed, but the maintenance door near the loading dock wasn't. At 2:30 in the morning, I slipped into that garage like a ghost. 15 years of moving through hostile territory had taught me how to be invisible when I needed to be, how to find the blind spots and dead zones that every security system has if you know how to look for them. I'd studied the building plans online, knew exactly which level Grayson's parking spot was on, knew the layout like I'd been living there for months. I found Harper in a corner of the garage, sleeping on an old blanket that smelled like motor oil and exhaust fumes. The sight of him there, curled up alone in that concrete tomb, made my jaw clench so hard I thought I might crack a tooth. This was how they were treating my dog, like some unwanted piece of equipment to be stored out of sight. Hey, boy, I whispered, and Harper's head snapped up so fast I thought he might give himself whiplash. For a split second, he just stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he was on his feet, tail wagging so hard his whole body was shaking, trying to jump on me and lick my face and make absolutely sure I was real all at the same time. Easy, buddy, I said, running my hands over his coat to check for injuries. He seemed physically okay, just thinner than he should be and way too jumpy for a dog who used to sleep through anything. Let's get you out of here. The extraction took exactly 3 minutes. No alarms, no drama, no confrontation. Just a man taking back what belonged to him. By the time Grayson and Talia woke up the next morning, Harper was sleeping in his old spot at the foot of my bed, where he should have been all along. Of course, Grayson couldn't let it go quietly. The next morning, he posted a video on social media. Some rambling rant about how I was unstable and dangerous, how I'd broken into private property like some kind of criminal. He played the victim beautifully, talking about how scared Talia was, how they were considering getting a restraining order against me. I watched that video exactly once, sitting in my kitchen with Harper at my feet and a cup of coffee in my hands. And I smiled, because Grayson had just made another mistake. He'd put himself on record as the victim of a crime that never happened, created a public narrative that was going to be very interesting to compare against the security footage that showed absolutely no signs of forced entry or property damage. More importantly, he'd just shown everyone exactly how rattled he was getting. The great Grayson York, reduced to posting angry videos on Facebook like some suburban dad having a meltdown. It was almost too easy, but I wasn't done with him yet. Not even close. Walking into that courtroom for the second time felt completely different than the first. 2 weeks earlier, I'd been some lost sheep wandering into the wolves' den, sitting alone while they carved up my life like it was Sunday dinner. This time, I had Lorna Vale walking beside me, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the kind of confidence that made other lawyers look twice. She was carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and she had this look on her face like she was about to enjoy herself way more than was probably professional. The whole atmosphere in the room shifted when we walked in. Grayson had been holding court at his table, probably telling some bullshit story to his paralegal and generally acting like he owned the place. But when he saw me with Lorna, his face went through this interesting series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then something that might have been actual concern. See, lawyers know other lawyers, especially in a city this size, and Lorna had a reputation that preceded her like a thunderstorm. Well, Grayson said, standing up and straightening his tie. Marshall finally found himself a real attorney. I have to say, Ms. Vale, I'm surprised to see you taking on such a challenging case. Lorna set her briefcase down on our table and smiled at him, the kind of smile that probably made hostile witnesses reconsider their life choices. Oh, Grayson, you know me. I've always had a soft spot for the underdog. Plus, I do my best work when the opposition thinks they've already won. I could see Talia shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She kept glancing between Lorna and me like she was trying to figure out how the hell I'd managed to afford someone like her. What she didn't understand, what neither of them understood, was that this wasn't about money. This was about family. And in the world I came from, family takes care of family. When Judge Bell walked into the courtroom, he looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping well. His usually pristine robes were a little wrinkled, his hair wasn't as perfectly styled as usual, and he had these dark circles under his eyes that suggested someone had been having some very uncomfortable conversations lately. He kept glancing at the papers on his desk, then at Grayson, then back at his papers like he was trying to solve some impossible puzzle. Grayson strutted up to the bench like he was walking onto a stage, still playing the part of the confident attorney who had everything under control. But there was something different about his swagger now, something that reminded me of soldiers I'd seen right before they walked into an ambush, confident on the surface, but with something nervous flickering behind their eyes. Your Honor, Grayson began, launching into what was probably a prepared speech about how simple this case was, how my refusal to sign the divorce papers was just delaying the inevitable, how everyone's time was being wasted by my stubborn refusal to accept reality. That's when Lorna stood up, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Your Honor, if I may, she said, her voice cutting through Grayson's monologue like a knife through butter. Before we proceed with any discussion of settlement terms, I believe there are some procedural matters that need to be addressed. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick binder, the kind of organized, tabbed, professionally bound document that immediately tells everyone in the room that someone has done their homework. She carried it to the bench like she was delivering a birthday present, setting it down in front of Judge Bell with a soft thud that somehow managed to sound ominous. This contains a comprehensive timeline of financial transactions, digital correspondence, and business relationships that my client believes may be relevant to this proceeding, she said, her voice perfectly professional, but with an undercurrent that suggested she knew exactly what kind of bomb she was dropping. Judge Bell opened the binder, and I watched his face go through a transformation that was almost entertaining. First page, confusion. Second page, concern. Third page, something that looked a lot like panic. He kept flipping through the pages, and with each one, his complexion got a little paler. Finally, he looked up at Grayson, and the expression on his face was one I'd seen before. It was the look of a man who'd just realized he was completely fucked. Mr. York, Bell said, his voice noticeably less steady than it had been when he'd walked in. Are you familiar with the contents of this documentation? Grayson was trying to maintain his composure, but I could see sweat starting to bead on his forehead. Your Honor, I'm not sure what irrelevant financial information Ms. Vale thinks she's uncovered, but— Irrelevant, Lorna interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Your Honor, the documentation clearly shows a pattern of financial entanglement between opposing counsel and this court that I believe raises serious questions about potential conflicts of interest. The beautiful thing was, we weren't even making accusations. We weren't claiming corruption or bribery or anything that could get us in trouble for making unfounded allegations. We were just presenting facts, dates, amounts, transaction records, property transfers, and letting Judge Bell connect the dots himself. And from the look on his face, he was connecting them just fine. Grayson was starting to sweat in earnest now, his perfect hair looking a little less perfect, his silk tie feeling a little too tight around his neck. "Your Honor, I object to this obvious attempt to." "Mr. York," Judge Bell said, closing the binder with a sound that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. "I think we need to recess this proceeding while I review these materials more thoroughly." He looked around the courtroom like he was seeing it for the first time, his eyes lingering on the court reporter, the bailiff, the handful of people in the gallery who were probably wondering why the hell the judge looked like he'd just seen his own death warrant. "This case is recused from my calendar effective immediately," Bell announced, standing up so fast he almost knocked over his water glass. "A new judge will be assigned, and all parties will be notified of the next hearing date." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing through the door behind the bench like his robes were on fire. The silence that followed was beautiful. Grayson stood there for a moment, probably trying to process what had just happened, while Talia looked back and forth between him and the empty judge's bench like she was watching a tennis match played in slow motion. Finally, Lorna packed up her briefcase and turned to me with that same predatory smile she'd been wearing all morning. "Well," she said, loudly enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear, "that went better than expected." The fallout from Judge Bell's dramatic exit was even more spectacular than I'd hoped. Within 48 hours, the entire case had been reassigned to Judge Patricia Hawkins, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had a reputation for running her courtroom like a military operation and absolutely zero tolerance for lawyers who thought they could play games with the legal system. If Grayson had been hoping for another friendly face on the bench, he was about to be seriously disappointed. But the real fireworks started when Lorna began filing her motions. She didn't waste any time playing nice or easing into things. She went straight for the throat with a series of legal documents that basically turned the entire divorce proceeding upside down. First came the motion to freeze all marital assets pending a full forensic audit, which meant Talia couldn't touch a penny of our joint accounts or sell anything we'd bought together. Then came the subpoenas for all communications between Talia and Grayson, going back to before our separation, because apparently, my dear ex-wife hadn't been as careful about covering her tracks as she thought. The beautiful thing about having someone like Lorna on your side is that she knows exactly which buttons to push and when to push them. She filed a motion demanding full financial disclosure from both parties, which meant Talia was going to have to explain where she'd been getting the money to afford her new lifestyle. She requested a complete review of Grayson's billing practices, questioning whether he'd been charging me for work that actually benefited his own relationship with my wife. She even filed a motion challenging the original divorce petition itself, claiming it had been filed under false pretenses. Watching Grayson try to deal with this legal avalanche was like watching a man trying to juggle chainsaws while standing on quicksand. Every time he thought he had one issue handled, two more would pop up. Every motion Lorna filed required a response, and every response revealed more information that just made his position worse. The guy who'd been so confident about steamrolling me was now spending his days buried in paperwork and emergency meetings with his partners, trying to figure out how the hell his slam dunk case had turned into a complete nightmare. But I wasn't just sitting around waiting for the lawyers to sort things out. I had my own life to get back to, and for the first time in months, I was remembering what that life actually looked like when I wasn't trying to be someone I wasn't. I went back to the gym where I'd been volunteering, teaching self-defense classes to veterans who were struggling with their own transitions back to civilian life. There's something about working with guys who understand what it's like to come home from war that reminded me who I really was underneath all the domestic bullshit. The gym was this old converted warehouse on the south side of town, the kind of place that smelled like sweat and determination and didn't waste money on fancy equipment when a heavy bag and some floor mats would do the job just fine. The guys who came there weren't looking for a social club or a place to show off. They were looking for a way to burn off the anger and frustration that came with trying to fit into a world that didn't always understand what they'd been through. "Keen, you son of a bitch," called out Tommy Rodriguez, a former Marine who'd lost his left leg to an IED in Fallujah. "Heard you were going through some legal drama. Everything okay?" "Getting there," I said, wrapping my hands for a session with the heavy bag. Turns out all those years of tactical planning are pretty useful in civilian court battles too. Working out with these guys, sharing stories and techniques, reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight. I had a whole network of brothers who'd been through their own battles and come out the other side. Dre would stop by sometimes when he was in town, and we'd grab beers afterward and talk about everything except the war. Lorna would call with updates on the legal maneuvering, her voice always carrying that edge of satisfaction that told me things were going exactly according to plan. Even Quinn Hale showed up one evening, driving down from his place upstate where he was raising 2 kids and working as a hunting guide. Quinn had been our sniper back in the day, the kind of guy who could put a bullet through a quarter at 800 yards, but now he spent his time teaching his 8-year-old daughter how to fish and helping his teenage son with homework. Seeing him made me realize that coming home from war didn't have to mean giving up who you were. It just meant finding new ways to use the skills you'd learned. "You look better," Quinn told me as we were closing up the gym one night. "Last time I saw you, you looked like someone had hollowed you out from the inside." "Yeah, well, turns out playing house with the wrong woman will do that to you," I said. "But I'm getting back to myself." "Good," he said, slapping my shoulder. "Because watching you try to be some suburban dad was painful as hell. You're not built for that kind of life, Marshall. None of us are." He was right. For 3 years, I'd been trying to squeeze myself into a life that didn't fit, convincing myself that normal meant quiet and peaceful meant boring. But there's a difference between finding peace and giving up who you are. I'd spent so long trying to bury the soldier that I'd forgotten the soldier was the best part of me. The legal battle with Grayson and Talia was just getting started, but for the first time since this whole mess began, I felt like I was fighting from a position of strength instead of desperation. I had my team, I had my plan, and I had something even more important. I had myself back. And that made all the difference in the world. Dre's investigation into Grayson's business dealings was like peeling back layers of an onion. Except instead of making you cry, each layer revealed something that made you want to laugh at how stupid this guy really was. While he'd been busy playing the role of hotshot attorney, he'd left a digital trail that would make a first-year computer science student shake their head in embarrassment. The real goldmine came when Dre hacked into the city planning database and cross-referenced it with Grayson's real estate transactions. Turns out our boy had been making some very convenient land purchases over the past 2 years, always seeming to know exactly which neighborhoods were about to get major development projects announced. And wouldn't you know it, the inside information was coming straight from Talia's office, where she had access to municipal planning documents as part of her paralegal work. "This is beautiful," Dre said over the phone, his voice practically vibrating with excitement. "They've been running a classic insider trading scheme, except instead of stocks, they've been flipping real estate. Grayson would buy up properties just before major announcements, then sell them for triple the price once the development plans went public. But the cherry on top was a zoning officer named Derek Paulson who'd been taking regular payments from one of Grayson's shell companies in exchange for advance notice of planning committee decisions. We had bank records, email chains, even photos from a restaurant where they'd met to exchange information. The whole thing was documented better than most military operations I'd been part of. I took everything we'd gathered and walked it over to the State Bar Association myself. Not through Lorna, not through some anonymous tip. I wanted my name on the complaint. These bastards had tried to destroy my life while running their own criminal enterprise, and I wanted them to know exactly who'd brought them down. The Bar Association moved faster than I'd expected. Within 3 weeks, Grayson was facing a disciplinary hearing that ended with his law license being suspended pending a full investigation. But they didn't stop there. They referred the whole mess to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Bribery, conspiracy, fraud. The guy was looking at enough felony counts to keep him busy for the next decade. The next time we showed up in court, it was like watching a completely different person sitting at the defendant's table. Gone was the perfectly styled hair and the $1,000 suit. Grayson looked like he'd been sleeping in his car and shopping at discount stores. His new attorney, some overworked public defender who'd probably been assigned the case that morning, kept glancing at his watch like he had somewhere else he'd rather be. When Judge Hawkins called the session to order, you could practically feel the shift in power. This wasn't Grayson's courtroom anymore, and everybody knew it. He tried to put on a brave face, but there's a difference between confidence and desperation, and anyone with half a brain could see which one he was running on now. Talia was in full panic mode by this point. She kept shooting nervous glances at Grayson, then at the judge, then at the exit like she was calculating her chances of making a run for it. When Judge Hawkins asked her to explain how she'd been able to afford her new lifestyle on a paralegal's salary, she actually started crying. Not the pretty kind of tears you see in movies, but the ugly, desperate kind that comes when someone realizes their whole world is about to collapse. "Your Honor," she stammered. "I didn't know what Grayson was doing with the information I gave him. I thought we were just talking about work." Judge Hawkins looked at her like she was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "Ms. Rodriguez, are you seriously trying to tell this court that you accidentally provided confidential municipal planning documents to your boyfriend without realizing he was using them for financial gain?" Watching Talia try to explain herself was almost sad. This woman who'd been so confident, so sure that she'd traded up from a broken soldier to a successful lawyer, was now sitting in front of a judge trying to convince everyone that she was too stupid to understand what was happening around her. The hearing ended with Judge Hawkins granting me everything I'd asked for: the house, my pension, my savings, everything they tried to steal. But more than that, she ordered a full investigation into both Talia's and Grayson's activities, which meant their legal troubles were just getting started. As we walked out of the courtroom, Grayson finally caught my eye. For just a moment, the mask slipped completely, and I saw exactly what I'd been hoping to see. A broken man who finally understood that he'd picked the wrong target. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said quietly. I smiled. "That was your first mistake." The final verdict came down on a Tuesday morning in late October, one of those crisp fall days where the air feels clean and everything seems possible. Judge Hawkins had reviewed all the evidence, listened to all the arguments, and apparently decided that justice wasn't just some abstract concept you read about in law books. She granted me full rights to the house, the one I'd bought with my military pension and spent countless weekends fixing up, thinking I was building something permanent with Talia. She restored my access to the savings account that I'd been contributing to for years while Talia had been planning her exit strategy. Most importantly, she confirmed that Harper was mine, though honestly, that particular battle had been won the night I carried him out of that parking garage. As for Talia, she walked away with exactly what she'd contributed to our relationship: her clothes, her personal belongings, and her thoroughly damaged reputation. Judge Hawkins had been particularly unimpressed with her claims of innocence, especially after Dre's digital forensics had uncovered email chains showing her actively discussing which municipal planning documents would be most valuable to Grayson's real estate schemes. Watching her pack up her things from what used to be our house was surreal. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, grabbing photos and jewelry and the fancy coffee maker she'd insisted we needed, but I'd never figured out how to use. Harper followed her around for a while, tail wagging, probably thinking this was some kind of game. Dogs forgive easier than humans do, I guess. The whole process took about 3 hours, with Talia loading box after box into a rental car that looked too small for what was left of her life. She didn't say much. Just asked where I'd put a few things and whether I minded if she took the blender we'd gotten as a wedding gift from her sister. I told her to take whatever she wanted. After everything that had happened, fighting over kitchen appliances seemed pretty damn pointless. When she was almost finished, she paused in the hallway and looked around the place one more time. This was the house where we'd talked about having kids someday, where we'd hosted dinner parties and watched movies on the couch and pretended we were building something that would last. Now it just felt empty, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. "I didn't think you had it in you," she said quietly, echoing Grayson's words from the courthouse. She wasn't looking at me when she said it, just staring at the wall where we used to have a photo from our vacation to Colorado, back when we were still pretending to be happy. I leaned against the doorframe and considered her words. For 3 years, I'd let her believe that Marshall Keene the civilian was all there was to me. I'd hidden the parts of myself that she said made her uncomfortable, toned down the intensity that came from 15 years of military service, pretended that the man who'd survived multiple deployments in hostile territory was somehow less capable than a flashy lawyer with connections. "You were right," I said finally. "The man you knew didn't have it in him. But that wasn't really me. That was just someone I was trying to be because I thought it's what you wanted." She turned to look at me then, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret flash across her face. "So who are you really?" I'm the guy who spent 15 years protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, I said. I'm the guy who knows how to plan, how to execute, how to win when everything's on the line. I'm the guy who doesn't give up, even when the odds are stacked against him. She nodded slowly, like she was finally understanding something that should have been obvious from the beginning. I never really knew you, did I? No, I said. You knew who I was pretending to be, but you never wanted to know who I actually was. She picked up the last box and headed for the door, then stopped and looked back one more time. For what it's worth, Marshall, I'm sorry. Not for leaving. I think we both know that was inevitable. But for the way I did it. You deserved better than that. It was probably the most honest thing she'd said to me in months, maybe years. I watched her walk out to her car, load the final box into the back seat, and drive away without looking back. Harper came and sat next to me in the doorway, and we both watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner. Standing there in the quiet of my house again, I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt or betrayed or any of the other emotions that had been eating me alive for months. I was just tired and maybe a little relieved that the whole charade was finally over. Talia had been right about one thing. She'd never really known me. But that wasn't entirely her fault. I'd spent 3 years showing her a carefully edited version of myself, hiding all the parts that made her uncomfortable. I tried so hard to be normal that I'd forgotten what made me who I was in the first place. But I remembered now, and that made all the difference. 6 months after the dust settled, I found my rhythm again. Life didn't look anything like what I'd thought I wanted when I was trying to play house with Talia, but it felt real in a way that those 3 years never had. I was back to being myself, not the watered-down civilian version I'd tried to become, but the guy who'd survived 15 years of the world's nastiest places and come home with his honor intact. The gym became my second home, teaching self-defense classes to veterans who were struggling with their own transitions. These weren't the kind of guys who wanted to hear about finding inner peace or letting go of the past. They were dealing with real shit, trying to figure out how to use skills that had kept them alive overseas in a world that sometimes seemed determined to forget they existed. Teaching them reminded me that everything I'd learned, everything I'd been through, had value beyond just surviving. Keen, you saved my ass, Tommy Rodriguez told me after a particularly intense session where we'd worked on situational awareness techniques. My wife was getting worried about me jumping every time someone walked up behind me. Now I know how to control that instead of just reacting. That's what it was really about, control. Not the kind of control that comes from manipulation or power games, but the kind that comes from understanding yourself and your capabilities. These guys had been warriors, and trying to pretend they were something else was just another form of lying. I kept a photo of my old Sable Echo unit on my desk at home, all of us looking young and dangerous in our gear, squinting into desert sunlight. Every name, every face, every scar, they were all part of who I was. Dre would call every few weeks to check in, usually with some new story about corporate executives who thought they could hide their dirty secrets from a guy who'd spent years tracking enemy communications. Lorna had gone back to her high-profile cases, but she always made time when one of us needed help navigating the civilian legal system. Quinn brought his kids down for a visit in the spring, his daughter immediately bonding with Harper, while his teenage son peppered me with questions about military life. Watching Quinn be a father reminded me that coming home from war didn't mean you had to give up who you were. It just meant finding new ways to use those skills. One afternoon in early summer, I got a letter that changed everything. The return address was from a law firm in D.C., but inside was a handwritten note from someone I'd helped extract from a hostile situation years ago. Maria Santos had been a journalist embedded with our unit during a particularly nasty operation in Afghanistan. When everything went sideways and we had to fight our way out, she'd stayed calm, followed orders, and made it home because we'd all done our jobs. Marshall, her letter read, I've been trying to track you down for years to say thank you. That night in Kandahar, when you carried me 3 miles with a dislocated shoulder because I couldn't keep up, that wasn't just doing your job. That was saving my life. I'm a foreign correspondent now, covering stories that matter because you and your team gave me the chance to come home and build something meaningful. I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. It still matters. That letter meant more to me than any courtroom victory, more than getting my house back or watching Grayson's empire crumble. It reminded me that the ghost, The operator who moved in shadows and protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Wasn't something I needed to bury or be ashamed of. It was the best part of who I was. People like Grayson and Talia will always exist in this world. They'll always be looking for someone to exploit, someone to manipulate, someone they think is weak enough to be their victim. But people like us exist too. The quiet professionals who walk among the civilians, who've seen the worst humanity has to offer and came home anyway, who know how to fight when fighting is necessary and how to protect when protection is needed. I am Marshall Keene, soldier, strategist, ghost when I need to be, guardian when someone needs protecting. And I never signed that fucking paper.